Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Hi, it's Nick, and for those who don't yet know me, I'm an Open Research Advisor based in the library here at the University of Leeds. You're joining us in Season 3 of the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where I'll be speaking to colleagues from both the University of Leeds and from other universities and organisations about open research, what it is, how it's practiced in different disciplines, and how it relates to research culture. If you haven't already, you can catch up with Season 1, which was an introduction to the podcast and to my co-hosts, and Season 2 with my colleague Tony Bromley, who was in conversation with a number of presenters from the REDS conference of 2022. That's the Researcher Education and Development Scholarship International Conference held here in Leeds. But now I'd like to introduce my guest for today, Hugh Shanahan, who is Professor of Open Science at Royal Holloway, University of London. Hugh has expertise in computational biology and statistics. He is co-chair of the Codata RDA Schools of Research Data Science and vice chair of the World Data System Scientific Committee. So welcome to the podcast, Hugh, and thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much, Nick, for having me along.
And before we get on to Codata and fair data and the definition of that acronym, I know fair data is a thing that you'll probably talk about. I must first ask you about Royal Holloway. So it happens to be, as I mentioned to you before, the university that I went to back in the 90s. It's quite a spectacular campus, especially in the snow. Have you had much snow in Heggen?
Yeah, we had over the last few days. Quite nice. I'm sorry, I didn't take enough pictures of it, but yeah, no, it looks great.
But for those that don't know, it's quite a spectacular building, isn't it? If you've not seen it, it's based on a French chateau, as I recall, a big founder's building. That's
right. Although it being a Victorian building, they instead of being built in white marble, it was built in red brick.
Red brick chateau.
Yeah.
Again, I was just telling you, in actual fact, the very first time I went on the web was on campus in the geology department. I actually studied English, but I had a friend in geology. And we went and played on the web in about 1994. So that would have been the Mosaic browser, I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm not sure. That was the first browser, wasn't it, back then?
Something like that, yeah, in the dim distance of time.
So as I say, thanks for joining us today. And I suppose to start with, just perhaps a little bit of your academic background. I mentioned, so are you a biologist?
Actually, no, I'm something of a cuckoo in some respects. So back in the early 90s, I did my PhD in high energy physics, in particularly a very, very sort of computational end of high energy physics, which was kind of the starting point to thinking about all of this. So I did a number of postdocs, one in Glasgow and then in Cambridge and then over in Japan. At that stage, I kind of got tired of tramping around the world, and I got a fellowship working in bioinformatics. So that was working with Janet Thornton's team she was then based at UCL in central London, and then we moved out to the European Bioinformatics Institution. And I was there until 2005. So at that stage, I started working in the computer science department. So yet again, another discipline change. So I was there from 2005, although it was about 2014, 15, when I kind of got more and more frustrated with trying to get to data and so on. And at that stage, it kind of started that journey into me thinking about moving into the open end of things. And I'd been kind of working on the Codata RDA schools. I'd been doing all of that. And then to the point where when I actually got my post as professor at Royal Holloway, I decided, okay, this time to sort of step out and I almost said come out of the closet. But yeah, I suppose it was a bit of a coming out moment when I said, Okay, I'm labeling myself as professor of open science.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So how did you become a professor of open science? I'm not being an academic myself. How's a professorship work? Is that you sort of decide what your area is for professorship? Do you? Or?
Yeah, so I wish it was something which was more exotic than that. But if you go to the HR department at Royal Holloway, they'll put me down as professor. The professor of open science, the open science bit, that's the thing that I put on my door, basically. Right. And I decided from day one, this is what I want to do. I'm not the only person to sort of do this. I mean, looking around amongst my colleagues, everybody does this. So, you have professors of machine learning, and we have professors of software language engineering, and so on. And I sort of simply said, yeah, okay, fine. If they can do that, I can do that as well. Which I think is, there's that quiet lesson in academia, which is ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission.
It's easier to ask forgiveness than ask for permission, but you haven't had to ask for forgiveness. I guess you are now recognised as an expert in open science. Or
so far, so good. Nobody's knocked on my door and or called me up from the higher offices and said, Hugh, yes, want to talk about this title you've been giving yourself? So I'll run with it until somebody says no.
And you explicitly, obviously, talking about open science. So here at Leeds, and I think in the sector generally, we often talk about open research, and I think it's sort of an active decision to maybe be inclusive of the humanities, but obviously you're from a STEM background and you're coming at it. Are you from a particularly STEM focused?
Yeah, I think so. Although, so number one, there's kind of the language difference. So in British English, there's definitely this distinction between science and research, and the need to be more inclusive. Other countries tend to be more relaxed about it. So, if you're in
Germany, in Europe, it tends to be called open science. I think you've worked with quite a lot of European projects, I think. Have you?
Yeah. And likewise, I think in the US, in North America, still tends to be open science. But that said, I totally get the fact that there needs to be open research. And in fact, if you go and look at Royal Holloway's policies on this, the conversation is always about open research rather than open science, because we think, a lot of the practices they map over. Although at the same time, personally, I'm always trying to be careful because I don't want to end up, telling, hey, you digital humanities folks, get a grip. This is how you do your stuff. And it's just like, no.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. That's come up in some other discussions. The fact that sometimes colleagues in the humanities perhaps feel that it's being foisted on them from the STEM disciplines a little bit, and you need to we need to define open research in different disciplines in different ways.
Absolutely.
But I suppose that's a good time to sort of ask, what is open science? I mean, you've already mentioned sort of access to data. But could you give us a sort of elevator pitch for what open science actually is from your perspective?
Yeah, I think being an academic, I should sort of pull out the 10-minute seminar description, which sort of says, yes, well, it appeared here at this point, and then here are the different interpretations, and so on. I'm going to be lazy, Nick, to be honest with you, and I'm going to give you what I think of open science as, and I want to try and also keep it. I'm going to go for as minimal a definition as possible, and then what I want to do is just try and unpack that a bit, if that's
okay. Yeah, no problem.
So the way I would talk about open science, and I'll talk about open science initially and then move on to maybe to open research, is, in two sentences, it's open science is a set of practices to make scientific research more efficient and effective when we live in an era when the questions that we're thinking about have become more complex, more challenging, and also are data and computation driven. Underlying a whole variety of different sort of aspects that sit with the open moniker in this, is that there's this principle of being as transparent as possible during the process of scientific discovery. Now, what I would also do is to say that with respect to open research, you're extending that remit in terms of saying, yeah, actually, there are many areas of research which are, again, facing bigger issues and are very often being driven by large data and so on. And hence the process of being transparent in terms of what you're doing is it also holds there. Now, I think it's worth unpacking that a little bit now, trying to come up with something which is short and pithy and so on. But then you're going to go, oh, what is all that? And what I wanted to do is just spend a little bit of time talking about the things that aren't included in that definition. All right. And because there are, if, you know, during, you know, these interviews, I'm sure you're going to talk to a variety of different people who say, what's open research? What's open science? And you'll get a different spectrum of opinions. Okay. And I'm not here to sort of say, well, I'm right because I am, you know, because I put Professor of Open Science on my door. So I'd like to kind of just explain those things which I don't sort of mention in there. So the first point is that in those two sentences, I made no reference to community or collaboration, and those are really, really sort of important ideas. All right. I would argue and say they kind of flow from the idea of, well, if you're going to be transparent, if you're going to be sharing stuff, actually, by fiat, you start working with people. You start realizing, hey, hang on, we've got to share standards and so on. There's no reference to research integrity, even though I think the more that time goes by, the more we kind of realize how gray the landscape is and how much we, and I mean that's everybody, that's the academics, that's research, you know, those in professional services, that's the funders, all need to have a good long hard look in the mirror of ourselves and say we need to reform ourselves. There's no reference to equality in terms of the fact that, you know, that's kind of an elephant in the room here, is that I'm chatting away and I'm then say, I put open science on my door because, you know what, I say so. And I do so with a certain level of confidence. And oh yeah, I'm a white middle class cis male. So I can afford to be a bit cheeky. And, you know, so there's no reference to those kinds of issues there. And there are a variety of people who really think hard about and say, no, hang on, this is super, super important. There's no reference to expansion of roles in terms of sort of saying, no, it's not just the wholly academic, it's the data steward, the research software engineer, the curator, all of those people who also sort of play roles.
I think it's really interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just, you know, from that perspective, I think what you're getting at there as well, because, you know, at Leeds, we've got a lot of initiatives around what we call in research culture.
Yeah. And
all of these are part of that, aren't they? They are about community. We start to talk a lot more, certainly our university and elsewhere, collaboration over competition, research integrity, as you said, and quality, and the equality, diversity issues. You know, I was talking to a colleague recently for this podcast around so-called bropen science. Have you heard that term?
No, but I think I can guess.
Yeah, the concept of bro. I mean, I'll link it on her podcast. You know, this idea that there's people already, you know, often white males in positions of power that can actually bully younger ECRs. You know, and there's a gendered element to that and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose that's one of the aspects I'm most interested in, is how this sort of underpins developing research culture, which, as you say, isn't captured in that sort of raw definition, I suppose, of open science.
Yeah, exactly. And the things, I mean, it's kind of from my background, I still do tend to go towards the well, surely there's a high tech fix to all of this, rather than saying, hang on, there are cultural issues that we need to address here. I think the things I would argue in terms of saying, focusing on that sort of minimal definition is to say that if you're clear about what it is that you're trying to do, which is to say, look, we want to be more efficient and effective. And what that means is we need to put aside this relentless obsession with papers and so on, and kind of understand that there are lots of different ways in which we need to be better at what we do. And we do that by making sure that we share all those ideas, whether that be code or data or pre-registered reports or protocols, or this whole sort of gamut of things that they enter into this milieu. Then that enables us to have that stop and hard look at the culture and say, we need to change things. I mean, if we think about different organizations that, in the commercial sector, or in terms of even things like the military and so on, there's once there's sort of clarity in terms of what it is that you want to achieve, then you start saying, well, it's ridiculous that things should be run in this way. Mm. As I said, I think there would be many others who would push against that and say, no, culture first. You get the culture fixed, and then that follows. And I would sort of say, I totally respect that. I totally get what's being said there. And I respect is being said there, in not just in a trivial kind of way. It is absolutely in total sense of respect. I guess it's my way of trying to figure things through.
Yeah, and it's both, isn't it? I suppose you're almost talking like top down and bottom up, aren't we? I guess from coming at the problem from different directions. And do you think we are making progress? I mean, you were very good. You were very good to do a talk for us about 18 months ago now. I was just looking back; it was back in May 2021, so a little over 18 months, isn't it now? On open research. I was looking at some of the things you pulled out there. You talked about openness as a spectrum. It's not all or nothing. I think there can be this sort of concern that if you're not doing everything, then you can't do anything at all. Yeah. But I suppose just maybe a trite question, but have we made any progress in those 18 months? Do you think? Are we moving in the right direction with open science and open research?
So, yeah, good question. I think it's. Let me focus on the UK, though I think a lot of the same arguments will hold in other high-income countries as well. So what I think we've seen is much more sort of institutional, well, not just institutional recognition, but institutionally kind of them moving on at that kind of level. So you see, 18 months ago, you had, universities like, say, Reading, who were the only ones who would have an open science or open research policy. And now you're starting to see a kind of a flowering of different things. And it's pretty open, which is, like Royal Holloway has an open research policy. And that's, I was very lucky to be part of that with Scott Glover, who's based in psychology at Royal Holloway, one of the kind of key leads, plus a number of other people. And that's politely nicking stuff from places like Reading, and modifying it and so on. And what you see now is the kind of senior management of universities saying, yeah, we get this. We need to do these things, and you see them rolling providing support in terms of rolling things out and thinking. So we're now at, so I think what you've got is definitely an acceptance of the importance of open research, open science by university management. They're not just, and that's more than simply, yes, this is quite a nice idea, but but make sure you still get 5 Nature papers out tomorrow, kind of sort of perspective. It's much more kind of saying, yeah, we need to do this and backing that up. And it feels like a lot of the effort now is sort of in the training side of things and raising awareness and saying, okay, and also sort of saying, okay, how do we do this in a sustainable fashion? Because we can't look at universities to sort of say, as you know, one of the things I'll argue is sort of say, yeah, infrastructure costs, all right, and furthermore, it's not just a once-off; it's a thing that keeps on going. So, how do you organize this in a sustainable fashion? So, first is, so what I think you're seeing a lot more of is the more of awareness raising and starting to do things in a more kind of concerted campaign in terms of training and so on, so that you get to a point where all academics are at least in some way aware of what the thinking is behind this approach. Not necessarily saying, like what I was talking to initially, not to say to them, now you have to change everything because this is year 0. It's to sort of say, okay, here's a whole bunch of things that you could do. Pick one of them. Or could you pick one of them? Have a think about that. Is the stuff that's there.
No, I like, as I say, I will post the link to that talk you did for us in the show notes for this. But I like your metaphor of a bridge. If you used you don't need a massive, suspension bridge necessarily to get across a river. It's starting, isn't it, and just doing something in the first instance and taking it from there.
Exactly.
And in that context as well, I mean, you've mentioned infrastructure a few times, and another concept that you talked a lot about at that talk was this concept of a first-class research object. So myself working in libraries, we've tended to be perhaps a little bit obsessed with open access, if that's not overstating it, and the journal article as the the final research output. And I think perhaps we're trying to get away from that a little bit. Would you say in terms of a first-class research object?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so. First of all, maybe to explain, I use this phrase "first-class research object," I think in my talk, and for the life of me, I can't remember. I know I wasn't the person who thought about this; it was somebody else. For the life of me, I can't find it. But I need to look harder. So let's think about it again from a UK audience. Is to say, what do I mean by first-class research object? It's a thing which you can present at the ref. Is that's the most kind of blunt definition, and that's of course the thing that all academics suddenly their antennae start kind of loofing up. And if you do look at the ref rules, even the previous one, whatever, in 2016. The people who are organizing the ref said, it doesn't have to be a paper, is what that submission is. Now, the problem was that the relevant committees, everybody kind of second guessed the committees and sort of said, well, no, they won't be interested in data sets or bits of software or anything like that. And that's a thing that so there was a great deal of sort of self-censoring. So it was like in the 2016 ref, I think there was like a handful of non-paper based submissions were the kind of things that are there for the research. I'd be interested. I haven't tried to look at what happened with the ref in whatever 2021 to see if there was any improvement on the situation. But still, overall, we have this, I would call, obsession with papers is what you need to do to make your career. And of course, papers is broad. That's monographs, books, the written word and conference proceedings, all of that jazz. And one of the things that I'm arguing is to say that we should think of data sets, the software that we write, even things like lab protocols and so on. All of those things should be things that we value, because they're stuff that other people can go and run with and actually go and make use of their research. And when you think about that in that way, that's, I think, an incredibly empowering thing, because what usually happens is, let's be honest, what we have in research groups is that there are people who are good at writing, and then there are the people who do all the other bits and pieces. And there's always that thing about, well, we have to, this person is X is really good. They're not, they don't write the papers. So how do we can't ignore them, but they're not one of us, and if you start saying to them, and let me pick one example, this is the, person X writes pieces of software or workflows or whatever that really work really well. Now, if you think of what they do as a research object, a first-class research object, then they get the credit. Other people are using their stuff directly rather than trying to figure stuff out from the paper, and so on. And people get on with doing things much more quickly.
And is there an infrastructure aspect to that? Because it perhaps, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, or to what extent it's true, but a lot of institutional infrastructure is focused on that paper, things like repositories and systems like Pure that I know you use at Royal Holloway, or Symplectic for us here at Leeds. They tend to focus, and the broader infrastructure perhaps focuses on papers.
So I think the steps are being made in terms of, we now have, the thing that's really important that's happened over the last, say, 10 years is that persistent identifiers are now a thing.
That's things like a DOI
and ORCID and so on. And correspondingly, so, and again, you get DOIs for data sets. You get DOI, you submit something onto Zenodo or Figshare or Data Dryad, you get a DOI for your data set. You get a DOI for your software. There's the software heritage archive. All of these things you now have. So they're that first layer of sort of atoms that, things that people can call. And gradually we start seeing databases building up, which are initially right now fairly generic, but then gradually will become more domain specific so that people can answer this. I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of one of the projects I've been interested in is this thing called things called computational notebooks. So examples of this are things like Jupyter notebooks and R notebooks and so on, which kind of put your code and your text and visualization all in one place. And they're at some level, they're a fantastic tool for doing analysis of your data. And in some respect, there really are like the inheritors for some disciplines, at least. There really are the inheritors of the thing that papers should be doing next. All right, because it's very, very interactive. You can play around with it as you see fit. But it's only now that we're starting to get our heads around publishing notebooks. And there are, so for example, there's something called NeuroLibre, which is doing that. And publishers are trying, and there's a bunch of other efforts that are there to try and make that happen, but it's still not quite there. And I think one of the things that's really, really key there is the search element. So, and that's because search is that's, you kind of sort of say, yeah, Google Scholar, everybody uses Google Scholar, but it's a service that could disappear tomorrow.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
perhaps the open source, that's another podcast in itself, isn't it? I think discussing the issues around open source versus commercial software. I mean, I think we've seen that a little bit with Twitter recently. The fact that a tool that's used by a lot of scientists and academics is then suddenly taken over by a billionaire in this case, and he can run it according to his whim. But that it is instructive, isn't it, to think about software in that sort of context.
And how much our services are really, really dependent. I mean, Google Scholar, I think, is a very extreme example of something that it's not anywhere part of their Google's mission in some respect. It could be pulled tomorrow, and then it's like, and of course we know, I mean, there's Scopus, there's WS and so on, but it's kind of, that's the one which is, you take that away, and then I think lots of academics are going to go, everybody's going to go scratch, go, oh yeah, we had these resources that we were using previously, and they'll have to kind of figure out how to use them again. So,
and I think perhaps the sector is thinking a bit about infrastructure at the moment. I mean, you'll be aware of Octopus, which is a platform that's intended to sort of pull things together in an open way. And that's, I've spoken to Alex Freeman, who was created Octopus, on this podcast. So that's, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, or.
So Nick, I have to make a full confession. I mean, I've heard of Octopus, but I haven't had a chance to have a play around with it. So I won't particularly comment on Octopus and myself. I think I'm delighted to see that services like that are coming into place. I am very disappointed that at the same time JISC have decided to withdraw support for core, which we have to get to a point where it can't be just like
just to,
on the other hand taketh away. Is,
I mean, just for people that may not be aware what core is, because again, it's kind of behind the scenes, isn't it? A bit really, so people might not be aware of it. Can you tell us what it is?
So it's a repository of, well, not so much a repository, but a service in terms of listing sort of open access publications and so on that's there. So it's, as you said, it's a thing which kind of sits in the background. It's not, the plug hasn't been pulled in it entirely, but
the funding's been withdrawn.
But the funding's been withdrawn, and now they have to, those people have to now figure out how to get supporting for this. So all the time, there's always, I think this will be a leitmotif with all of these interviews in terms of infrastructure costs. Never ever trust anybody who says, "Oh, don't worry, it's really important, and people somehow, some way, it'll be paid for. X will be paid for." You have to kind of say, this is like roads and buildings. You got to build them, and you got to keep them updated, and every day you got to, and that's the quid pro quo of the.
Isn't that almost, I mean, I don't want to go too far off piece, but almost a fundamental issue with the internet, thinking back to when I tried the internet for the first time back in 1994. Things have changed since then, haven't they? I mean, it's this commercial ownership and the big data companies, whether it's Facebook or Apple or Google, that this is all part of an issue across the internet.
I think, I mean, I want to stress and say that I don't have a problem with commercial organizations running services. I don't see that's there, as long as there isn't a point where you can't change your mind and say, I'd like to use this sort of service from another. I think that's the important element. I mean, again, if we use the internet sort of idea, is that, again, in the background, there's a colossal amount of people and organizations who were involved in, laying down the optical fiber and the routers and the stuff that's there, and they do a really good job. And it's just that you're not like dependent on one organization that do that. It's huge numbers of different organizations who are there, who are doing all of that, you know, providing the backbones, the tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 3, all that, you know, that the sort of level of connectivity and so on. So as long as we're not dependent, that we can always say, oh, thank you, but you know, that these other people can do just as good a job at 80% of your cost. Thanks, we'll use them now. That's the thing that keeps everybody honest.
Well, with your admission that you haven't yet tried Octopus, perhaps you can listen to Alex Freeman's podcast, and perhaps hope that she doesn't listen to yours.
I'm not having a go at Octopus.
No, I know.
The next level up. I'm afraid.
No, completely. But you just in terms of, as I say, I did talk to Alex, and I think it's an interesting model, and it will be interesting to see how that evolves. So I'm just a little conscious of time, not least because I'll have to transcribe this podcast, as I said to you. But you touched on it a little bit, but talked about infrastructure and the fact that policies are developing in universities, etc. And I think earlier on you suggested that training's the challenge now, or is that a particular challenge actually training people? I mean, already you've mentioned Jupyter notebooks, Figshare, Zenodo, all these different services, pre-registration, registered reports, there's data sharing and software, and there's so many skills. So I mean, two aspects to that, I suppose, for me, just to ask you about this training for them, and also recognition. I mean, people are busy, aren't they? Researchers are busy.
Sure.
So how, why should they do this stuff if they're not getting sort of rewarded for it?
Good question, Nick. I mean, I think there is obviously a chicken and egg type of scenario, which is unless people start developing expertise in that background in a particular area, then they won't sort of evolve to the point where they get recognition for things. The things I would say is that we need to be fairly focused in terms of what it is, the type of training that we provide. So if you're talking to, say, somebody who's, say, a PI who's got a research group, okay, the first thing you're doing is you're saying to them, you know what, you don't actually have to need to know all the ins and outs of what's happening here. You need to kind of understand, probably have a sort of fairly broad understanding of terms of saying, okay, keeping an eye on your data and so on. And if your area means that you're developing software, that actually your team should be following things in certain, you should be doing things in a certain sort of way, but you don't necessarily have to have everything on your fingers and tips. I think the other, if you're a PhD student, if you're an early career researcher, then again, it should be about, okay, what is it that's useful for you? And, I mean, if we think particularly about PhD students, we also should be aware that, every PhD student now, we also need to kind of be giving them the skills so that actually, if they want to go, that if they decide not to go into a research career, that they can think other options in their lives, and to say to them, hey, hang on, there's some practices here which might be of useful to them. And again, it's not saying to them, oh yeah, you need to know everything. You could kind of sort of say to them, oh, actually things like annotation of data, that might be something that's useful to you for the things that you do. Or it could be developing software, or it could be thinking about documenting lab protocols and so on. So I think those are so it's and also I think it's also about, before we say to people, do this and you will eventually at some unspecified point you will get some, you'll get rewarded for this, is more to say to them, the first win is to say, if you do this, this is actually something that's just going to make what you do more efficient, first of all. Okay. So in terms of, talking to a PI, to say to them, hey, you know what? You remember that thing where, a postdoc would go or a PhD student would go, And then the next person along would spend like 6 months figuring out what the hell the last person did with the data that they generated or the so on. You can say, you know what, if you do things in this way, think about that, you can bridge that gap, and you can get them much closer to making that transition much more much easier for you. If you can say to a graduate student, listen, stop, you kind of understand how to do stuff in Excel, but if you do things in R, yeah, I know it takes a few afternoons to get your head around R and stuff like that, and it's scary, it's programming. It means that you can process 1,000 files in one go rather than one file spending 1,000 days doing the same thing with an Excel spreadsheet, and you can do it in a reliable, reproducible way. Then those are the wins. So again, it's always I still kind of what I talked about 18 months ago in terms of small wins. Things, the efficiency gains, I think, are the things which are important, which is which is probably the Achilles heel in some respect of open research policies, when you kind of say, oh, here's the big picture, when you want to kind of say, one good thing for you now, this and trust me, this will help you a lot.
That's a good way of thinking of it. And then, as I say, we'll let you go in a moment, but just aware that we haven't yet defined the acronym FAIR. So perhaps you can give us a quick overview of what FAIR means. And for my personal benefit, perhaps focus a little bit on the I and the R. I'm okay with the F and the A, but I struggle a bit with the I and the R. Could you tell us what FAIR means?
Sure thing. So findable, FAIR it's an acronym. It's shorthand for, I think it's 16 principles. I don't actually have them tattooed across my chest.
Not yet.
Not yet. But the letters stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And what it is it's in essence, it's about doing two things, which is trying to encapsulate the kind of hard-won principles that came out from sort of sharing data, and research data management, sort of saying these are the things that you should be doing. And the second point, which I think hopefully addresses at least the I one, is taking that next step, which is to say, can we make this sort of machines talking to machines? I'm a little bit cautious about that, because as I mentioned previously, you can get very carried away with the machine to machine. Everything works perfectly, and that's a big ask. And I'd rather have stuff which is again something small that works now, almost FAIR all in little letters rather than in big capital letters.
I think we struggle perhaps because we look after an institutional data repository, and our data is so heterogeneous. I think it's really difficult to look at the interoperable aspect of it in that sort of machine to machine.
So you asked me to kind of maybe dive a little bit more into that. So so the findable aspect is to say, well, can I actually get onto my laptop and find this data set wherever it sits? I go, aha, here's a DOI for this. Accessible means that, I've got the DOI, and you know what? When I click on the DOI, it takes me to the landing page where I can go click and I can download the data set. I mean, this is all kind of short, kind of cartoon-like figure. Interoperable, excuse me, interoperable, the I, says I've downloaded that, and now that data is in a format that I recognize and know how I can read into to my computer. And then the R is reusable, which is to say there aren't any licenses associated with the data set which say, yes, you're free to download, but no, you can't really publish anything about it, that it gives you that freedom. Now, those principles do things, they're a lot more subtle than that. So they, for example, they sort of say things like, well, data might not be there for reasons, perfectly reasonable ones, but metadata, the data about the data should always be there, and so on. So I think we've kind of reached a point where fair is something that's accepted. We've stopped having kind of cosmic discussions about what does fair means, and much more people sort of pulling up their sort of saying, okay, we have an idea of what's there. I think what's kind of interesting is that the next phase is much more about use cases to sort of say, yeah, this is what works in a particular domain. So something to keep an eye out for are things called fair implementation profiles, which are effectively use cases of how fair gets implemented for a particular type, for a domain piece of data. And I do recommend, so there's a new collaboration which I'm not part of, so I don't have shares in it, but it's something called World Fair, which is doing a lot of work in that particular area. So if you're kind of struggling for saying, oh, okay, how do I make my data fair? You can look up these profiles and sort of say, oh yeah, I'm working with geophysics data of some kind, and I can say, oh yeah, this is an example of how this was done, and now that kind of gives you, in some respect, a recipe to work at it from there, and so on. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, thank you. And as I say, I do kind of know what fair means, but I suppose actually putting it into practice, especially when, as I say, we've got a heterogeneous collection of data in a local repository, and then trying to point people, colleagues, research colleagues at maybe the domain specific repositories and standards, and a lot of it comes down to, as I say, these disciplinary differences is quite a challenge for someone in a role like mine, I think.
Exactly. So as I said, I think the fair implementation profiles, I think you could see something on the horizon where there's a whole library of them that you can kind of pull out and go, okay, this data set, this type of data set, this is what I could do. That I think is an interesting sort of thing. It's a lot of work, but it's I think that could be something quite important.
Yeah, no, I'll have a look at those. Thank you. So I will let you go. I mean, you did warn me at the outset that you might talk a lot, which is great. That's fine. Thank you very much. I suppose just a final sort of parting shot at the question that we've touched on already, but what is next for the sector, do you think, in open science? I mean, what should be our priorities? Whether locally at our institutions, nationally in terms of the UK or internationally. I mean, very quickly off the top of your head, what should be the priorities?
So I think the challenge now is that, so institutionally, things are starting to get their act together. We also have domain-specific work, which is there. And what we need to do is to kind of get our heads around that matrix, so that we have people who are working, and by the way, I'm doing lots of hand motions right now, which will mean absolutely nothing to you who listening to this podcast. But if that in some respect, we have the people, the data stewards, the research software engineers, who do things at an institutional level, who are doing things quite generically and thinking about things that way. But then also for particular disciplines, you have a corresponding people who have much more of a domain-specific area who will work across institutions. So, so that things like N8 or and so on could sort of say, oh yeah, there's the data stewards associated with archaeological data, say, and they work, in the UK, there are a handful of people who work in the UK or indeed across Europe.
So we know where to signpost people for the expertise in a specific discipline. Yeah.
So that then, and that I think is the sort of the we need to kind of get our heads around how to work at those with those sort of two levels. And I think it's sort of like almost like that matrix type of model in terms of training and also in terms of services and infrastructure.
Yeah. No, brilliant. That's great. Thanks very much, Hugh. Well, as I say, I'll draw it to a close there, but thanks very much for your time, and perhaps we'll have you back on in another 18 months, see if we've made any more progress, if you can spare the time. And if there is still any snow, perhaps take a few photos of founders for us to for old time's sake.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, and I'll see you again.
Thank you, Nick. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Email us at academicdev@leeds.ac.uk. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.